I'm a kid, your audience. But I'm also a presenter on Sky Kids' weekly news show, FYI.
Hello everybody and welcome to FYI, the show that puts you in the know. I tell you what, I love saying that. I'm here to meet the children who were caught in the crossfire. In this reserve, they have a secret weapon to fight against the poachers. It's specially trained dogs.
Hi, how are you doing?
How are you? Nice
to see you. In a hole the size of HS2, the only thing to do is keep digging. That's what you've got to keep digging. It's a big hole.
So even though I'm 12, I'm really experienced with news stories. But there's so much information out there that even I struggle to find the truth at times. When it comes to safe and trusted areas for news, we don't really have much choice. Even adults struggle to find trusted news sources. However, for us kids, it's even harder, with only a few places specifically made for us kids to turn to when we need trusted information. But it's getting better. The BBC's Daily News Round Bulletin and website is a place where kids know they can go to for impartial and accurate news. And Sky Kids' weekly news show, FYI, actually tackles fake news with a special feature.
Several videos of people sticking magnets to their arms after having the COVID vaccine have gone viral. But is this real?
That's where I got the shot. And here's the magnet on the arm. I didn't get the shot.
The videos were posted online to support claims that the vaccine has been used to implant microchips, which contain metal fragments, so governments can track people's movements.
It's fake news. Experts and makers of the vaccines deny microchips are being inserted, saying the videos were staged and there's no evidence to prove the theory of microchips. Many social media sites have removed the videos or issued fake news warnings.
First News is a weekly newspaper aimed at kids that also works on informing us about the world around us, and it has teamed up with Sky Kids FYI to bring all its content into the classroom on First News Education TV for free. Now more than ever, schools are turning to these programmes as a classroom resource.
I think the first thing is that nobody wants to look stupid, and whether you're an adult or a child, so I think they really want to be informed. Secondly, they like to discuss things with their friends and work things out for themselves and be on their own kind of journey of discovery. The real issue, of course, is the internet, because there is so much fake news. I mean, if not even fake news, but misinformation, all mixed up with the information. And it's really important that children learn not to just take as read anything that they read or hear about in the playground, that they, talk about with their friends, but they really need to go back and think about it, why is somebody saying this? Does this sound right? And that they actually have those critical thinking skills, that they'll actually go and kind of check sources and think more about whether something sounds right, because it's so difficult in this day and age to kind of really know whether anything is real, because there's so many people with different agendas trying to manipulate people's thoughts and minds. I think more important than ever now is that children know that there are trusted news sources to go for and they're looking for them. They know that they are being kind of manipulated with their thoughts on so many kind of websites and social media platforms, and so they're looking for trusted sources. We work with parents, with schools, to be that kind of safe place to go to where you will find out what's really going on in the world in a kind of a non-sensationalist way as well, because even on trusted news platforms, people still have a different take on it. Many of the adult newspapers know that fear sells, so they can exaggerate stories as well. In First News, where we also counter some of the fake news that's around, and they react very positively because they're happy to be able to share their newfound knowledge with friends and family and be the ones that, that are in the know. It's just so important that children get a kind of a reliable, accurate, non-sensationalist view of the world.
Across the pond in the United States, fake news and misinformation is just as big of an issue as here, possibly even bigger. When it comes to helping kids in the US learn about misinformation in the world, the award-winning Nick News series made its return last year with an hour-long special called Kids, Race and Unity. Nick News covers a range of subjects from the coronavirus to immigration, the US election and climate change. Their focus is to educate and empower action through stories from real kids.
I'm Ricky Belletto, one of the reporters from CBBC's News Round. We're aimed at 6 to 12-year-olds, and misinformation, disinformation, fake news, whatever it is you want to call it, is something we've covered at great length. Now, in the last year, we've worked alongside the BBC's misinformation reporter, Marianna Spring, who shared her expert knowledge with our audience, and she's told us that doing a piece for Newsround is sometimes more trickier than talking to an adult audience. Now, one of the things we say at Newsround is if it provokes a strong emotion, check it out. Emotions drive us all to engage with social media, but it's difficult for us to assess something when we've got really strong feelings about it. BBC Education has massively ramped up their commitment to tackling the problem of fake news and misinformation, giving children, teachers and parents the tools they need to understand what it is and how to tackle it. We're now in partnership with BBC News to support their impartiality agenda. Now, we know the issue is on the non-statutory teaching guidance, so BBC Education has worked hard to make content available that's both relevant, engaging and a helpful resource to 11 to 16-year-olds. Not just to identify what it is, but show our audience how it can impact their own lives through things like social media. So let's start with a big campaign launched last year for BBC Bite Size. Fact or Fake featured a whole host of content from videos, quizzes and articles designed for independent learning. So Fact or Fake served the slightly older end of our audience, and our BBC Own It brand, which is straight talking service to help young people feel safe and get the most out of the internet, also did its part to tackle misinformation. Now, under the BBC Education umbrella, which includes BBC Teach, Own It, Bite Size and now Newsround, all platforms have shared the content that they've been making over the last few years to enrich our offering and get more eyes on the stuff that we make. At Newsround, we know how important this topic is to young people. This piece of evergreen content sits on the BBC Newsround website. It's also on our Newsround YouTube channel. It puts fake news in the hands of our audience and then guides them through on a journey to discover how they can identify it and what to do when they see it. And the BBC takes children through from simple messaging here on Newsround to more sophisticated ideas with Fact or Fake and the BBC Bite Size team, and also lots of other platforms too, including BBC Young Reporter. So that's what the BBC is doing to tackle misinformation.
So, all sorted then. No worries, we can simply avoid fake news by heading to programmes like the ones we've just spoke about, right? Unfortunately, the stats on how well children are able to tell what is misinformation and what isn't is pretty worrying.
Only 2% of children aged 9 to 16 have the skills needed to critically evaluate news, which means while us younger people might be the best at using technology and accessing information, we are not the best at doing it critically. So, which country is the best at giving us kids the media literacy skills we need? It's Finland! They have worked for many years to make sure that media literacy is part of every child's education. In 2021, the UK ranked 10th out of 35 countries across wider Europe. In the UK, it's Ofcom's job to promote media literacy. Ian McRae tells us how they help promote this.
I'm sure most of you will know that Ofcom has a duty to promote both adults and children's media literacy. So a key way in which we deliver this duty is by researching children's online behaviour and experiences and their attitudes to an understanding of the online world. So first, just to share some broad stats and data that emphasise just how much children live their lives online. Some good news to start with. Virtually all children have internet access at home. Over 99% of households with children have some form of access. For virtually all children, the internet is a critical way in which they navigate the world. Our research finds that between September and November 2020, 7 to 16-year-olds who went online estimated that they spent an average of 3 hours, 48 minutes a day online. Our research finds that by the age of 13, 95% of children have their own smartphone. In relation to what children do on the internet, two things stand out. As children get older, they become voracious users of social media. Despite most platforms setting their minimum user age at 13, by the age of 11, around 6 in 10 UK children use at least one social media site. We know that children are much more reliant on online sources than they are on traditional media. A long-term characteristic is that the amount of television children watch has been falling and is being replaced by spending time online. Our research in late 2019, just before the coronavirus pandemic, of course, found that talking to the family and television was still the most common ways to find out about news among 12 to 15-year-olds. That was followed by social media, and in terms of the sources that children use, BBC television services were still the most used sources, used by 41% of 12 to 15-year-olds. But it is noteworthy that 6 of the top 10 most used news sources among 12 to 15-year-olds are social media sites. So fundamentally, 12 to 15-year-olds are interested in the news and are actively seeking it out. The second thing to note is that they use multiple sources. On average, 12 to 15-year-olds were using 4.6 different news sources for information about the coronavirus in March 2021. 2/3 of 12 to 15-year-olds consider that what they see on news sites and apps is all or mostly true. Quite interesting perhaps that 1/3 of them don't think that they're mostly or all true, so some skepticism about traditional media. However, skepticism is much higher on social media sources, where just 35% think that the news that they come across on social media sites is either completely true or mostly true.
Hi, my name is Mark Little. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Kinzen, and we're a startup that focuses on detecting disinformation as it spreads across the world, across content platforms. My background is that I was a journalist and a television presenter for about 20 years for the Irish national broadcaster, RTE. And way back in 2009, I realized that social media was going to change journalism forever. At that stage, I decided I wanted to set up a company, a social news agency. We were the first social news agency. And while I did all of that work, I also saw the dark side of the way in which these big social media platforms had been developed. I saw the fatal flaw. For all the democracy that was involved here, for all those news stories that were being told, it was so hard to cut through the noise. And I also started to see the impact of these algorithms. Now, these algorithms are designed for one thing and one thing only. That is to create emotions. They're not designed for quality. They're designed to make people feel happy and sad and sometimes angry. And so therefore, these recommendation systems are a recipe for false information, for polarization, for distrust. And that's the fatal flaw that we're trying to rectify right now. The problem is this first wave, let's just say, of the social web is so badly designed because the algorithms are basically undermining trust, and they're forcing our children down rabbit holes. I'll give you an example. Last year, for example, when we saw young people who were concerned about their health and they were seeking out information, there are people out there, these people, the anti-vaxxers, for example, that are looking for children who are vulnerable, who are scared, who are fearful in a moment, and capitalizing on those people when they find them. Those kids are essentially being sucked down these areas where they're searching for a piece of information and they find these conspiracy theories and these lies, and then these groups find them and they force them into very radical situations. The web at the moment, as it's designed, is a huge threat to the way in which our children find their way in the world. Now, for me, regulation has a place here. We should definitely be supporting regulation across the world that requires these content platforms to be way more transparent about the data they collect on our children, about the recommendation engines, the algorithms that they design. So they should be open to inspection to make sure that there is some quality filter in here, that these algorithms are not working automatically to send children and young people down these rabbit holes of polarization, radicalization, and lies. Definitely there's a role there. But the danger with regulation is it can go too far the other way. In many of these new laws that we see regulating online harm, we see definitions that have no real relationship to the reality. On the one hand, they are suppressing freedom of speech. We should not be trying to stop people saying crazy things on the internet. We should focus on freedom of reach, that is, limiting the ability of algorithms to spread outrageous things to millions of people, to infect mainstream public conversations. So in many ways, think of this like flattening the curve of the information virus. So the focal point of regulation has to also be underpinned by innovation. We need a lot more work on developing positive algorithms that help promote healthy information. And that's the key challenge for us. It's not just about suppressing bad information, it's finding ways to create innovative new uses of algorithms and machine learning to promote awareness and understanding and education, and to bring our children down a pathway of learning, which in many ways resembles the traditional education systems that we're trying to build. And that's where education itself also has a critical role to play here. We have to be developing new ways of teaching our kids the critical thinking skills that an older generation took for granted. So we've got to be teaching kids that when they go on social media, they go online to seek information, that there are systems at work here that are trying to create an emotion that's disconnected from their brain. We've got to teach our kids to be curious about where information comes from, to be aware that it's not as simple as a friend or a family member recommending a piece of content to you, that there is technology at work there, and there are groups that are trying to capture your attention. So this combination of regulation, innovation, and education is critical. You cannot have one without the other two. And finally, then, I think the role for people who create quality content for children and for young people is also challenging, but I think it's quite clear. First of all, there has to be a new way for quality content providers to develop quality content for children in the format at which the child is comfortable with. So we've got to be thinking about repurposing content to the way in which young people are grazing and consuming content across this whole range of formats and a whole range of platforms. But we also need to be trying to draw them back to new platforms that are essentially built with much more positive versions of the algorithms that are currently at work in the big social media companies. So I think children's content providers have to think like big tech platforms, build personalization systems, recommendation systems, think about machine learning, natural language processing, all the really exciting innovations that are happening, and apply that to traditional notions of education and teaching children. So therefore, the challenge here for, I think, quality content providers is to think more like technology companies, while also doubling down on the essential values that children's television, children's broadcasting in general, typifies in most of our Western democracies. In all of this, I sound like I'm very pessimistic in some ways about what's happening in social media, but again, I'm extremely optimistic because I've seen journalism and the news business that I care about having adapted a very long journey to what essentially is a new wave in the development of the internet. So in the first iteration of the social web, we made a lot of mistakes. In this second generation of the internet, I think we have the capacity to design systems that essentially capitalize on the best instincts in our psyches, and that is to learn, is the intentional search for knowledge. If we can start from that point, consider this at day zero, then I think there's a huge scope for children's media to adapt itself to a new reality in which it has unlimited power. And again, I'm the optimist. When I think back to my early days looking at John Craven's Newsround, and I think about the capacity for my children to learn today, I'm hugely excited by what the future holds. But again, it's got to be a critical combination of education and regulation, and most of all, innovation.
The good news is that the government is now planning on bringing in new laws to tackle fake news and other harmful content like racist abuse and things that affect children. The online safety bill will mean that social media companies and other websites will be fined if they don't remove harmful material. My fellow reporter, Ella, spoke to Caroline Dinenage, the Minister of State for Digital and Culture, to find out more.
So just how big of a problem is fake news and harmful content online?
Well, I mean, it varies, but we know that over the last 12, 15 months of the pandemic, for example, despite the fact that, the internet has actually brought huge benefits, particularly I think for young people, the ability to continue to learn and to continue to chat with your friends and your loved ones. We also know that it has brought a whole number of dangers with it as well. And not least is some of the fake news that's been spread about the pandemic, but a whole bunch of other things as well. And, nearly everybody has seen some of that sort of content online.
Yeah, I think seeing misinformation online is something that everyone sees pretty frequently. But at the moment, we can only complain to social media companies about this content. So how are they going to be held accountable for this content?
Well, so it's a whole new suite of laws that we're bringing into force, and it's basically just, I mean, if it had a kind of strap line to it, this bill would be about making much stronger links between what internet companies say they do and what they do in real life. And so they need to have a much stronger duty of care, really, to the people that use their services.
Right, and how are these new laws going to help with this issue?
So a whole range of things. I mean, at the moment, internet companies don't really have to act unless they have been made aware that there's some sort of illegal or harmful content on their site. And what this new legislation does is it means that they have to be much more proactive, looking out for this sort of content. And we're going to be overseeing this with Ofcom. And companies that don't do this properly can face massive fines, actually, fines of up to £18 million. So it really is substantial penalties if they get it wrong.
Well, it sounds like a great way to make the internet a safer place, and it's very different to how things are being done now. So do you think that companies have been doing enough to protect us so far?
Well, we've been working really closely with some of the platforms, particularly over the last year and a bit that we've been in a pandemic, to sort of try and address things like dis and misinformation about COVID online. But we know that there's so much more that they can be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. But in the UK, we have freedom of speech, which means we're allowed to voice our opinions and criticise the government, for example. So do these new laws mean that the government will be allowed to take down any posts that they don't like?
No, it won't mean that. So we've even put in the bill lines to make sure that the freedom of speech and freedom of expression is protected. And we're really clear that this legislation, unfortunately, it won't stop you being offended online. Sometimes you might read something that offends you. We've got very clear lines on this. What we don't want to do is stop people who've got genuine worries, genuine concerns from being able to express them and have those fears reassured. So people are genuinely going online and looking for the right information about health and well-being and things around the vaccine, for example, then we need to really be able to address those and help and support and direct them to really reliable forms of information. What we're desperately trying to do is to tackle other things, which is people who deliberately go online to spread lies about the vaccine that could actually risk people's lives.
But don't you think that there's still a danger that people can just move to other sites that maybe aren't as well regulated?
Well, the good thing about this legislation is that it applies to all platforms where they've got user-generated content. Doesn't matter if they're big or small. They all have to seek out illegal content, and they all have to do their bit to protect young people and make sure that they can't access inappropriate materials. And it also doesn't matter whether this is content that's generated overseas as well. This legislation can tackle overseas companies too.
Well, this certainly all sounds very promising. So when's it going to come into play?
Well, it's all starting to go through Parliament very, very soon. It's a long old process, but my key message to the platforms is that this is legislation that's coming down the line, and it's not just happening here. Lots of countries around the world are looking at what we're doing and thinking of doing something similar themselves. We're a bit groundbreaking, but I know a lot are following behind us. So we want to see these online companies making changes now, because the legislation will be coming down the track quite soon.
Well, this has definitely been very informative, so thank you so much for speaking to me, Caroline.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Ella. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
The good thing is that programme makers like you guys recognise that us kids can be easily misinformed with fake news, or read or watch some biased reporting on an issue. When it comes to the UK, the BFI are doing all they can to try and combat some of this issue with their Youth Audience Content Fund, which is supporting indie production companies and broadcasters who want to make great factual TV for kids. For example, Sky Kids and Indie Fresh Start Media have been awarded money from this BFI fund to make news explainers called I Don't Get It.
Hello, my name is Robo Braden. Ask me anything you like.
Don't get it? Don't worry. We've been investigating the world of AI, the future of space exploration, and issues like climate change, the refugee crisis, and bullying. You can see all of our explainers on Sky Kids and on our webpage, first.news/FYI.
It's for children to watch when there's something really complicated in the news, or when there's something about the world that just doesn't make any sense. In an early premiere of our I Don't Get It on Misinformation, here's a sneak peek preview.
Live FYI Global Network Newsroom. This is Fake News with Braden.
Hello everyone, today's headlines. Strange bat-like creatures have been spotted living on the moon. 2 girls in Yorkshire have uncovered evidence that fairies are real. And the annual spaghetti harvest is getting underway in Switzerland. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a load of rubbish, right?
Yeah, and you're not a real newsreader.
Well, you're right about that one. But believe it or not, all 3 of those supposed news stories were actually reported on by grown-ups, and loads of people were taken in by them. The story about creatures on the moon was a hoax published in a New York newspaper back in 1835, and the paper saw a dramatic increase in sales as a result. The pictures of the fairies were taken in 1917, and many people believed they were genuine until the 1980s, when the girls finally owned up and said they were actually cardboard cutouts. And the spaghetti harvest? Well, that was reported on a serious news programme called Panorama back in 1957.
Spaghetti cultivation here in Switzerland is not, of course, carried out on anything like the tremendous scale of the Italian industry.
But it turned out to be an April Fool's joke by the BBC. So should we be worried about these things, or are they just a bit of fun? Well, to help me answer that question, here's Claire Milne, a fake news expert.
Hi, Braden. Now, you might think that some of the stories that you just mentioned there are a bit silly, but actually, false information can be quite sinister. And as long as people have been sharing information, they've also used misinformation to try and gain an advantage, whether that's to make money, spread fear and confusion, or win political power. The Romans, for example, used to publish short, snappy propaganda messages on some of their coins. Today, misleading information can travel around the world with just the click of a button. Sometimes people spread information that is false because they want to do harm to other people, or because they want to serve their own interests.
You are fake news. Hey, look at all that fake news. The fake news. The fake news. Totally fake news. When I say that, their heads explode.
Accusations of fake news were repeated so often by Donald Trump that the term quickly became part of everyone's everyday vocabulary. But fake news can actually be quite an unhelpful phrase, and people began to use it all the time when they saw information or claims that they didn't agree with, rather than when that information was actually wrong or misleading.
So why does it matter if there's fake news on the internet?
People need good information in order to be able to make decisions about their lives, whether that's to do with how to spend their money, who to vote for, or whether or not to go and get vaccinated. Now, in the pandemic at the moment, we've seen some people choose not to get vaccinated because of misinformation about the safety of vaccines, or outright falsehoods about certain ingredients that might be in those vaccines. And when misinformation becomes widespread, it can shake people's trust in all information, including the things that are true.
So how can we spot fake news or misleading information? Well, I've been looking into this. One crucial thing is to work out where the information came from. If it's on Sky News or other respected news sites, then you can probably trust it. But if the story's been published by an organisation you don't know, or some random person, then it would be sensible to double-check what they're saying. Next, it's important to ask yourself whether the story sounds believable and whether there's solid proof about what's been said. If it sounds like it's been made up, like this one, then it probably has been. But the trouble with stories like this is they often get shared and end up going viral as more and more people see them. Remember, you can check anything that looks a bit dodgy on fact-checking websites run by teams of journalists. They're excellent tools to help you work out what's fact and what's not. And finally, that old saying that the camera doesn't lie just isn't true anymore.